Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dig into some really cool research that might just flip how we think about farming on its head. It all revolves around this one simple but kind of radical idea. What if using less of something could actually get us a better result?
So let's just jump right in with a question that honestly seems to go against everything we've been taught about agriculture. Is it possible that using less fertilizer could give us better fruit? I know, it sounds a little backwards, doesn't it? Well, a team of scientists wanted to find out, and the answer they found is pretty fascinating.
But to even understand why you'd ask a question like that, we first have to talk about the big problem with fertilizer that modern farming is facing. Let's call it the fertilizer dilemma.
Okay, so nitrogen fertilizer, it's basically a modern miracle. There's no way we could grow enough food to feed the planet without it. But, and it's a huge but, it's a total double-edged sword. When we use too much of it, that excess nitrogen doesn't just disappear. It pollutes our waterways and contributes to greenhouse gases. So farmers are stuck with this really tough question. How do you get the amazing benefits of nitrogen without the serious environmental price tag?
And that challenge, well, it brings us to a really innovative new approach. Turns out there just might be a smarter way to grow our food.
The key piece of tech here is something called nitrification inhibitors. I know, that's a mouthful, but the concept is actually pretty simple. Think of them like a slow-release capsule for the soil. You see, instead of giving the plant a giant blast of nitrogen all at once, which it can't absorb anyway, these inhibitors make sure the nitrogen becomes available little by little over time. It means less waste, and the plant gets a steady diet, way more efficient.
And this is where a project called TeleNitro comes into the picture. This was a pretty big deal, a collaboration between research institutes all across the Mediterranean, from Tunisia to Spain and Italy. Their whole goal was to take this cool idea of nitrification inhibitors out of the lab and see if it actually worked in a real-world farm.
So how did they do it? Well, they picked a very specific crop in a very specific place. For an experiment I'm just going to call the Melon test.
The whole team set up shop in southern Tunisia, and they ran this thing for a full melon growing season. I mean, they were there for the whole shebang. They started planting in late March, and they tracked that crop all the way through to the harvest in early July. So this wasn't just a quick check-in, it was a deep dive.
Now what I love about this slide is the contrast it shows. On the left, you've got the neat, tidy, color-coded scientific plan, exactly how it's supposed to work on paper. And then on the right, you see that plan brought to life out in the actual field. This shows you this wasn't just some lab experiment. This was real science happening out in the dirt.
So the heart of the experiment was to see what would happen if they cut back on the fertilizer. In some of the plots, they reduced nitrogen use by 15%, and in others, they got even more aggressive and cut it by 30%. And to figure out what really worked best, they compared a few different things. They had plots using those standard chemical inhibitors, but they also tested some newer, plant-based or bio amendments. And of course, they had control plots with no inhibitors at all to measure everything against. You can just feel the hands-on work that went into gathering all this data.
All right, so they ran the test. The melons grew, they were harvested. So, what happened? This is where we get to the really interesting part and the central question of the results. Was this all about growing more fruit or growing better fruit?
And what they found wasn't a simple yes or no. It was much more interesting than that. The data showed this really fascinating trade-off between the quantity of the melons and the quality of them.
So when they broke it down, there was a pretty clear difference between the types of inhibitors. The typical chemical ones, they were great at keeping the total amount of fruit, the yield, pretty high. The bio-based options, though, they weren't quite as good at maintaining the yield, but they had some other surprising tricks up their sleeve. But this is where it gets really, really cool. Let's forget about the total number of melons for just a second. What actually happened to the fruit itself when the plants were getting less nitrogen?
And here it is, the big surprise. With less nitrogen, the plant's metabolism literally changed. Instead of just putting all its energy into growing bigger leaves and stems, it started pumping more sugars and acids into the fruit. It even built firmer cell walls. And the result of all that? The melons grown with less nitrogen were actually sweeter, firmer, and they had a longer shelf life. So get this, less fertilizer led to better tasting fruit. How amazing is that?
So, what does all this mean for the big picture? Let's zoom out a bit and think about what an experiment like this could mean for the future of farming.
The researchers who did the study said it best. They concluded that this work isn't just about melons. It,
quote, offers a pathway toward more sustainable nitrogen management and improved fruit quality. It's basically a roadmap for a whole new way of thinking.
At the end of the day, what this whole explainer really shows us is that maybe we don't have to choose between getting a big harvest and protecting the environment. By using smart science, it seems like it's actually possible to find a better balance, to use our resources more efficiently, to lower our environmental impact, and hey, maybe even grow better food while we're at it.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to chew on. In a world that's always pushing for more, what if the real secret to better food and a healthier planet isn't about using more at all, but just about farming smarter? Thanks for tuning in.